Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man's aunt passes away and leave him items that's wanted by more than just collectors. So, what item is passed down in your family? Because mine's is the Soundless Lady.
My Aunt Rachel practically raised me. After a lengthy battle with a terminal illness, she passed last year, leaving what little she had left after the hospital bills were paid. I was to take care of her cockatiel parrot, Tugboat, and her collection of 50s cartoon-themed collective plates. Basically, the only two items that couldn't be easily sold at an auction. If you saw the plates, you'd see why. Downright creepy things. One in particular, a plate portraying a young cartoon girl feeding apples to a giant frog. It's like the whole thing was made by two different people. The girl looked positively Disney, while the frog was more, uncomfortably realistic. It was such an odd item that there had to be a collector looking for it somewhere. I was sure of it. Yet for weeks, I couldn't find anyone even remotely interested. I posted pictures of the plate on pretty much every social media account I had, along with a few auction sites. But there were no takers. There were no markings or stamps indicating year or brand, unlike the other plates. And I was starting to think it was custom made. I couldn't stand looking at it. So I put it in a box in the garage. The others went up on my kitchen wall. My aunt would have wanted it that way. I live in a house not too far from the lake, on the outskirts of a small Minnesota town. There are a few houses in the nearby area, but I couldn't even hit the closest neighbor's yard with a rock if I tried. There's only a single streetlight that works outside, and that thing is flimsier than our summer weather. I rarely have any visitors, as this place can be a bit too out of the way even for my friends to come by. I inherited this place from my mom, and who passed away when I was younger. I'm one of the lucky house owners of my generation, but at what cost? My aunt's bird, Tugboat, fit right in. It was easy for me to fix him a big cage in one of the back rooms. When you're living on your own in a place like this, you got more space than you know what to do with. My aunt's funeral was simple. She'd insisted she paid for it herself, so it had to be as basic and cheap as could be. She hated the thought of ever being a burden, and she practically begged me to take care of Tugboat. You don't say no to that. You just don't. Besides, that bird was damn near the only thing that kept me sane through the COVID pandemic. Having lived in an empty house, you learn to identify most sounds around the property. The hum of the fuse box, the buzzing kitchen lights, the noise from the fridge against the backdrop of a TV that's been on way too long without anyone watching. This was the only reason I ever really took notice, that one night when this all started. I was turning on my electric toothbrush one night, only to notice it was completely silent. The motor was running, I felt the vibrations, and I saw it spin, but there was no sound. Not a peep. Yet, I could still hear the TV in the other room just fine. Over the next few days, there were several of these odd instances. Once, the egg timer went off, but didn't make a sound, causing me to overboil my breakfast. I thought the ventilation was broken once, but it turned out to have just gone quiet. Hell, at one point I dropped one of my aunt's collective plates. It shattered against the ceramic tiles, yet didn't make any noise. I was starting to think I was going deaf, but the two doctors I spoke to confirmed my hearing was just fine. Still, the mental image of seeing that falling plate and expecting a loud crash, only for it to remain silent, there was something eerie to it. A friend of mine, Patrick, works for the sheriff's department. We usually had lunch once a week to catch up, but that tradition teetered off during the pandemic. This time, I met him at the supermarket, but barely even noticed him. I had been having trouble sleeping and getting to work on time, as my alarm clock sometimes stayed silent for no apparent reason. My boss wasn't too happy, so I had to start using a vibration alarm. Patrick elbow bumped me by the fruit aisle, snapping me out of my thoughts. "Hey there," he said, grabbing a handful of oranges. "You doing okay?" "Yeah, sorry, didn't see you there." "These are crazy times," he said. "I heard about Rachel. I'm sorry I couldn't make the funeral." That's okay, I nodded. She never was much for men in uniform. Patrick laughed. We went our separate ways and finished our shopping, only to meet in the parking lot outside. We'd managed to park next to each other without even realizing it. He leaned against the hood of his car. Hey, have you seen any strangers around? After this year, you all seem like strangers. You know what I mean, he chuckled. Strangers, passers-by. No, sorry, I don't get out much. Some of your neighbors have had problems. Be careful. Problems? He looked at me like a deer in headlights. You don't know? Apparently there'd been reports of a thief. First, they thought it was raccoons, as someone had gone through the trash cans. But raccoons don't try to pick locks. They also don't leave food behind, or human-sized handprints on the windows. Some people had reported seeing a woman with tangled hair roam about, but the police hadn't managed to find her. This is what made me start looking more closely at my own property. I had noticed the garbage can lid gone missing, but I hadn't given it much thought. Also, I could have sworn there were handprints on my car one dewy morning. I tried to tell myself that it was all paranoia, but after what Patrick said, it seemed that everything was a clue, or a warning. In my mind, the strange woman was lurking behind every corner. I tried to put it out of my mind. One night, as I heard Tugboat sing his interpretation of Earth, Wind and Fire's September, I took an extra long shower. As I was scrubbing my hair clean, my head went quiet. I could feel the water touching my skin, but it made no sound. Through the door, I could still hear the bird sing his heart out. You'd be surprised how cold, warm water can feel when you've got ice in your veins. I rinsed off most of the shampoo and stepped out. There's a small frosted glass window in my bathroom. The silhouette of a pale face was pressed against it. I screamed, but no sound came out. Tugboat kept singing in the other room, unaware. I grabbed my robe and ran into the kitchen to call Patrick, but I couldn't hear anyone pick up on the other end of the line. I couldn't hear my own words when I spoke. And there, just outside the kitchen window, was the silhouette of an intruder trying to find their way in. A pair of unevenly sized eyes stared at me, slightly too far apart. As our eyes met, she bolted, probably heading for the back door. I picked up my keychain. Tugboat stopped singing from the other room, as he sensed something was wrong. As my hearing returned, I could hear the comforting sound of sharp metal from my kitchen knife as I pulled it from a drawer. My pulse was running away from me. It is one thing to think of a home invasion, but to live it violates every thought of privacy and safety you have. It was turning real fast. There was a large sliding glass door leading out to the backyard, and I figured if there ever came an intruder, it'd be through there. The same room where Tugboat chirped away, but now he'd gone quiet. I ran in there, still fresh out of the shower, my knife held in a cramped, forced grip. I almost convinced myself that I was ready to use it. There she was, just outside the door, pale, with unkempt hair, eyes of different sizes, slightly too far apart, dressed in what looked like a hospital gown. She was malnourished and frail, but something told me she had the strength of a madwoman. Her eyes darted back and forth, searching for something. As they landed on me, she opened her wide mouth to scream. Not a sound came out. As her mouth grew to an unnatural size, I could feel vibrations in the air, like standing next to a concert loudspeaker. The sliding glass door shattered, the shards fanning out towards me. The knife in my hand started shaking, but I managed to hold it. She stepped inside, her bare feet smearing ribbons of blood on the hardwood floor. She was coming for me, a constant vibration from an unnatural scream, tearing through my body. I had to try to call for help, and sprinted back into the kitchen. The light bulbs burst overhead, turning the room black. Still, not a single noise. A stray light from the streets outside made its way through the kitchen window, making the room drip with long, pale shadows. My aunt's collective plates rattled on the wall. Glasses along the kitchen sink were cracking and breaking. Empty bottles spilled onto the floor. Cabinet doors shaking back and forth, opening seemingly at random. An old recipe book fell from a countertop, the pages flicking back and forth. I pressed myself against the kitchen window, fumbling to get it open. She'd cornered me. Her mouth was wide open in that impossible scream, her body vibrating with machine-like intensity. tangled hair twisting and stretching, as if thrown about in a storm of its own. Her uneven eyes searched for me, twitching like insects. And still, she didn't make a single sound. There were no humming fans, no buzzing electricity, only a soft breeze outside the window. I couldn't even hear my heartbeat. I managed to stumble out of the kitchen window, stepping onto the sharp gravel path. I still held onto my knife like a comfort blanket. I didn't even bother to see if she followed me. I just ran. There was no time to get in the car. I ran into the woods, following a trail that would lead me to my neighbor. Soon, the rhythmic beat of my feet went quiet, my breath too. I tried to scream for help, but the sound was swallowed. She was right behind me. Long nails reached for me, fingertips touching the edge of my robe. And all around me, nothing but tranquil nature, unbothered by my terror. I was knocked to the ground, scraping my legs against the undergrowth. I slashed with my knife, trying to fight her, as a dainty hand picked up my keys from the side pocket of my robe. I rolled away, only to see the mess of tangled hair walk away. Her uneven eyes gave me a last look as she turned her back to me. She looked right through me without a care in the world. I got to my neighbor. My dirty feet muddied their floor, and by the time the police came, it felt like a waking nightmare. I made my statement, showered for the second time that night, and slept at a nearby motel as the police cleared my house. The next day, I assessed the damage. The house had been searched thoroughly, but nothing was stolen. Not too much was broken either. Seems she was looking for something specific, not trying to steal any valuables. The police were just as dumbfounded as I was, and I didn't report anything stolen. My insurance company would need an explanation. It was hard to explain why it looked like the house had been hit by a tornado from the inside without sounding insane. All the collective plates laid shattered on the floor. Poor Tugboat was so traumatized, he's since stopped singing. Going through the damages was heartbreaking, but it made me take notice of something peculiar. The garage had been searched as well. It was pretty much fine though, at least compared to the house. Among my boxes, I noticed a single item missing. The creepy plate I'd put aside for my aunt. The only one I didn't want in the house. The one with the young cartoon girl feeding the giant frog. It was gone. I guess I found the single collector who wanted it.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bump in the night. On tonight's episode, a man gets a test DNA kit for his birthday, discovers that someone in his family gave him a rare condition. So, would you believe? I got an invitation with my DNA test.
For my 31st birthday, my friends got me a heritage DNA test. One of those where you send a sample and get an approximate percentage of what makes up your background. I don't think there was anything in particular that made them gift it to me, though. I think they ordered one for themselves. Got a 2-for-1 kind of deal. Still, I figured it'd be fun to check out. My biological grandpa died when my dad was very young, and my grandmother remarried long before I was born, so I was never told a lot about that side of the family. I'd always been a bit of a sickly child, so I've been wary about looking too closely at my family and health history. But I figured this couldn't hurt, so I filled out the form, provided the sample, and sent it on its way. Then I just sort of forgot about it. When I finally got the results, it came with a few surprising revelations. While the majority of my heritage was entirely predictable, there was an 11% splash of something called the Northern Scandinavian Blue Hill Tribe. I asked my parents about it. While my mother had no idea what the Blue Hill Tribe was, she was pretty sure it wasn't from her side of the family. My dad was equally confused. Sure, he didn't know much about his biological father, but he knew for a fact that the man was from Oklahoma. His mom, on the other hand, was Minnesotan. Dad got curious and ordered his own test within the hour. As I ended the call and boxed the packaging up, something fell out. A sturdy envelope made of thin navy blue cardboard and sealed with a sunflower emblem. It had a mild chemical smell to it, like a sweet ammonia. At first I thought it was going to be some kind of special offer, much like what got me that test in the first place. But after turning it over, I could see it was addressed directly to me in handwritten cursive. It read, "Dear Daniel, Congratulations on your recent result. As part of our further effort to explore the diverse world of unified heritage, and in cooperation with our various multinational partners, we would like to extend an invite to descendants of the for an eventful day of education, connectivity, and celebration. Please consider this invitation and review the enclosed details at personal link using your login credentials. We hope to see you there. I didn't know exactly what to make of it, but I decided to check it out. And holy hell, it reeked of scam. Here's what it offered: a fully paid 3-day stay at a hotel in Manchester, New Hampshire, free entry to the company-sponsored Heritage Celebration event, alongside other members of both the Blue Hill tribe, but also other unique and diverse backgrounds. There were several groups listed, mostly hailing from the Scans, the Carpathians, and the Ural Mountains. I would have to pay for the trip to get there, though, and they were clear about food, drink, and room service not being included, but all in all, it sounded too good to be true. After several hours of trying to find my way through customer service websites, I finally got a hold of an actual service rep over the phone. At first, they seemed to have no idea what I was talking about, but when I referenced a personal case number at the bottom of the envelope, they referred me to a special events manager. This manager, in turn, confirmed everything.
I know.
They laughed.
I know how it sounds, but this is actually a sort of golden ticket thing. It's a biennial event and part of a charity effort, so there's a tax incentive for us as well. If you can make it, I'd recommend checking it out. We got some event photos on our website for reference.
I did as she suggested, and I gotta say, I was convinced. I accepted. My flight arrived on the morning of the first event day, about 3 hours ahead of opening. I had an uneventful early check-in, spotting the locked doors through the lobby. There were a few posters marking the Heritage Celebration event, and there were already a couple of people roaming the halls outside, but I decided to catch my breath a bit before the doors opened. I got to my room and clocked out for a couple of hours. I double-checked the event schedule on my phone, making mental notes of the various talks, guided tours, luncheons, dinners, and get-togethers. It was a full 2-day event. I was surprised at just how much there was to do, considering the event was intended for no more than a couple of hundred people at most. Still, I couldn't complain, but just as I drifted off for a nap, I got a notification on my phone, a text from my dad. Apparently, he'd recently gotten his results back. Strangely enough, he didn't have any percentage of the Northern Scandinavian Blue Hill tribe in his genetic makeup. Maybe my mom wasn't as Southern as she thought. Once the doors opened, there were about 100 people walking about. Some looked like average Joe Nobodies. Others were clearly some kind of corporate representative. I could tell at least 6 different accents, just by walking around, and a couple of foreign languages. There were a few booths to check out, mostly advertising various new services and products by the company behind the DNA test, but also one that was just information about various forgotten or unusual tribes. Going through the pamphlets, I couldn't find one about the Blue Hill tribe, so I decided to ask the service rep behind the counter.
Blue Hill?
He said, raising an eyebrow. I'm not sure. Another rep whispered something in his ear, and he nodded.
Right.
He corrected.
We don't have any reading material on that subject, but I think there's an info session. Should be part of the Tribes of the North meetup.
I double-checked the schedule again and made my way to a couple of events. The Tribes of the North meetup was an after-dinner event, part of the late-night off-hours socializing thing they tried to get going. I spent the afternoon listening in on various other topics, trying to pass the time. There was a speaker on the topic of nomadic North American tribes, as well as a workshop about forgotten languages. It was all interesting in its own way. But I found myself drifting away just after lunchtime. I had to take a rest around 3 p.m. because of an upset stomach, a relic from my sickly past. Later, I took a walk around town and had a decent meal at a local restaurant before I headed back to the hotel. I was a few minutes late to the meetup. There were about 24 people there in total. We didn't really have any common features. We had different skin, hair, eyes, and we were all from different parts of the U.S. A couple of them were Canadian, and there was this one guy from the Philippines. It was pretty clear who the event organizer was, though. A chipper young woman in a black pantsuit with a company logo pin and a digital clipboard. She went around the room confirming that everyone was a member of the Blue Hill. I overheard an older woman mentioning she was categorized as over 30%, while a young man mentioned he only had 5%. The young woman cleared her throat and excused herself, calmly demanding the attention of the room.
Thank you all so much for coming.
She smiled.
I'm sure you have 100 questions, and we thought this might be a good time to get to know one another a little better. Please follow me.
We were led through a corridor to a smaller open room, a sort of meeting space in the back. They'd turned down the lights a bit and set out a couple of platters of cheeses, crackers, and some alcohol-free sparkling wine. There were a couple of people there already. I was about to spark up a conversation with a 50-year-old man who looked as confused as me when the chipper young woman took hold of the room again. She directed our attention to a man that I can't for the life of me remember the name of. Weston or Wesley, I think. He in turn welcomed us and encouraged us to indulge in the various snacks scattered throughout the room. Then he introduced us to the topic of the evening, the Blue Hill Tribe.
If there is one thing I'm certain of,
He started.
it is that every single person in this room has had a serious medical condition at some point in their life. Something unusual. Does anyone mind sharing an example?
I didn't speak up about the severe ulcers I had as a kid and the partial transplant I had to get. But there were others who openly shared various issues. Heart valve issues, cornea transplants, nerve damage. Everyone seemed to have something. The man just nodded, as if expecting this.
This is sadly a common attribute of people with lineage dating back to the Blue Hill tribes. So let's take a closer look at the history and customs of these unique people. And while we do, please feel free to mark yourself in the attendance sheet.
He continued to speak of a group of people native to the northern Scandinavian mountain ranges. There were dates, locations, an approximate number of tribal members, and a few other sparse details. I marked the form while I waited, realizing pretty early on that what he was saying was suspiciously generic. He spoke of leather and bone craftsmanship, and a belief in mountain spirits, but there were no details, no references, no pictures, drawings, or artifacts. I noticed a lot of people around the room paying close attention and not really thinking too much about what they were filling out on the attendance sheet. But I took a closer look. Our names were already on the sheet, so we were only supposed to make a check mark. However, there were also percentages printed on the side, corresponding to the percentage of heritage we had in common with this tribe. I recognized my 11% and the 30% of the old woman. There was also a series of other numbers that I didn't immediately recognize. When I thought no one was looking, I snapped a picture of it just in case. After a 15-minute lecture on the history of the Blue Hill tribe, I came to the realization that I hadn't actually learned anything. The locations and dates were so generic that there was no way to fact-check it, and there were no details as to their various customs and crafts. Looking around the room, I noticed the chipper young woman was off in the corner, whispering to someone on her Bluetooth earpiece, her eyes scanning the crowd with a serious demeanor. There was a man in a suit by the doorway taking pictures with his phone, and a hotel functionary offering refreshments being turned away. This was clearly a private matter, and of great interest to the company, for some reason. I snapped to attention as the room applauded. The lecture came to an end, and we were given some time to mingle, but not without another reminder to make a mark on the attendance sheet. I chatted a bit with a few people, but it all felt a bit forced. Just a few words here and there. I got the impression that none of us had very much in common. No one seemed to have any idea where that part of their heritage actually came from. There was this one guy who had studied his genealogy extensively, who insisted that it was strictly impossible for him to be even partly Scandinavian.
I've mapped out every family member for 6 generations.
He scoffed.
There's no way.
As more and more people filtered out into the night, I decided to lag a bit to see what was being said behind closed doors. I wasn't sneaking around on all fours like a spy, just lingering a little too long on the other side of a bathroom door or stopping to conveniently check my email near a hushed discussion. I picked up a few bits and pieces, discussions about our percentages, for example. There was also talk about a second event the following night, and how it wasn't officially on the schedule. They referred to it as a sort of closing ceremony. There was also a short talk about inviting a few of us to a private meeting. I heard 2 people squabbling a bit about the details, and I didn't catch much of it, but I clearly heard a sentence as they finished. "Just get the right ones," one of them snarled.
None of that 3% shit.
I didn't like that, not one bit. Returning to my room, I decided to pack up my things. I had a bad feeling about whatever they were up to, and I couldn't help but to imagine that they had something planned. Maybe it was all a scam after all, or something worse. Either way, I wasn't eager to find out. I couldn't find a reasonably priced flight back home until early morning. It was almost 12 hours away, but I figured I could pull an all-nighter and get out as soon as the sun rose. I could wait a few hours at the airport if need be. With my bags packed and ready, I settled in for a long night. It was somewhere around 2 a.m. when I found myself staring at late-night TV and scrolling on my phone. As a salesman prattled on in the background, a stray thought hit me. I decided to take another look at the attendance sheet photo. There was a set of numbers by each person that didn't make immediate sense to me. I brought out a pen and paper and started breaking them down. First in sets of 2, then individually, then sets of 3, trying to find some pattern or idea. It took me a little longer than I cared to admit to recognize something. The last 4 numbers correlated to one pattern: floor and room number. That left 4 other numbers, which, when broken down into pairs of 2, correlated to a month and day. The date itself didn't make much sense, though. For me, it was a few days after I'd sent in my first sample. Then it hit me. It was probably the day they received the sample. Taking a closer look at the percentages, I could see that everyone with a 9% heritage or lower were situated on lower floors, while those with 10% and higher all seemed to have the higher. Maybe there was a sort of unspoken threshold happening at 10% and up. Could that be what they referred to when they said to get the ripe ones? As I scrolled through various images from previously hosted charity events, I got a notification. My phone warned me that my camera app had unexpectedly closed. Strange, seeing as how it wasn't open to begin with. A bad feeling settled in my stomach. I was on the hotel Wi-Fi. Could they be monitoring our activities? I considered the option that I was just being tired and paranoid. That might very well be the case, but on the other hand, I'd heard what I'd heard. It was stressing me out, further upsetting my already sensitive stomach. I could feel a tinge of pain and decided to go get some ice. Might sound like a stupid home remedy thing, but sucking on an ice cube has always helped me calm down. I followed the corridor, got myself some ice in a bucket, and returned to my room. As I was about to round the corner, I recognized a familiar sound. My hotel room door being closed and locked from the outside. Peeking around the corner, I noticed 2 people dressed in black disappearing down the hall, mumbling quietly to one another. Returning to my room, I couldn't help but to second-guess myself. Had the bathroom door always been open? Was the same channel on the TV playing? Had someone moved my bags? It was hard to tell. That's how I spent the night, wondering. My heart sometimes skipped a beat as I thought I noticed something new, but ultimately, I couldn't find anything immediately threatening. I pulled out my phone battery just in case and kept it in my other pocket. No one would be tracking me anytime soon. I messed up my bed to make it look like I had slept in it, even though I spent most of my time in the bathroom, ready to lock the door and call the police. I nodded off a few times, but eventually, the sun broke the horizon. A few rays of sunshine slipping in through the frosted bathroom window. I got my bags and left. One nervous elevator ride later, I slapped down the hotel key on the reception and headed for the exit without elaborating. I accidentally made eye contact with the hotel security guard by the exit, who gave me a curious side eye.
Sir?
He asked. I stopped briefly and excused myself. He held up a hand.
Sir, may I speak with you?
He repeated. I have an appointment, I smiled. Sorry.
It won't take long.
He smiled.
Right this way.
Looking at the silver-colored revolving door that could get me out of there, I considered my options. I could make a break for it, or I could just see what this was about. I decided to just talk to the man, banking hard on it not being anything serious. In hindsight, I should have gone for the goddamn door. I was taken to a small room right next to the reception. There, he asked to see my phone. I showed him, although the battery was still out.
My supervisor had a couple of questions.
He said.
She's just outside. Won't be a minute.
I'm sorry, but I gotta... He pocketed my phone, smiled, and stepped out of the room. But it wasn't an ordinary service personnel kind of smile. It was almost apologetic. Like he knew he'd landed me in some kind of trouble. And through the door came the chipper young woman from the previous night. She wasn't as chipper this time. She didn't sit down, instead opting to stand on the opposite side of the room with her arms crossed. For a solid minute, she just stood there, considering what to say. Finally, she let out a sigh and took a step forward. I felt like a scorned schoolboy being dragged to the principal's office.
Are you leaving early?
She asked.
Would be a shame to miss the get-together tonight.
I'm thankful to have been a part of this, I said, but I really ought to get going.
Oh?
She feigned surprise.
Family emergency?
That's private, I said. I could still hear hotel personnel outside and figured she didn't want to make a scene. I leaned back in my chair, confident and quiet. She didn't take that too well.
I think it'd be for the best if you stayed a little longer.
She continued. I don't think I will.
I don't think there's much to debate.
I'm sorry, but you have no... She slammed her fist on the table and stared me down, unblinking and furious. There was a slight tremble in her movement. There was no way those outside didn't hear us, and yet no one moved a muscle. Perhaps she was in more control than I'd anticipated.
I think you're gonna stick around for a while.
She snarled.
Or we're gonna have a problem. You wanna have a problem with me?
No, I said, shaking my head. I don't.
Then you're gonna shut the fuck up and play along.
I was dumbstruck. There was no ambiguity here. She was outright threatening me. I could barely understand why. Maybe she'd seen something on my phone while I was connected to the hotel Wi-Fi. Or maybe they'd noticed me spying. Perhaps they saw me pondering the attendance sheet, I don't know. Either way, they weren't taking any chances. I didn't see that hotel security guard again. Instead, they put me in a room with a very quiet man in a suit. He didn't answer any questions, and he wasn't much for small talk. All he did was stand outside the room, checking in on me as soon as I made a noise. I spent all day in that room, this small 10 by 14 feet room with little more than a couch, a coffee table, and the most generic-looking hotel painting I'd ever seen. Still, as calming as that room was, I was freaking the fuck out. But there was nothing for me to do at that point. No harebrained schemes could make me magically phase through the wall. I was stuck there, and I sure as hell wouldn't fight that guy. Didn't take a detective to spot that he was armed. The stress made my stomach act up. I was allowed to use the bathroom, but they kept the stall door open. Then it was straight back the room. I tried frantically to come up with some kind of plan, or figuring out some specific turn of the corridor where he wouldn't have a clear shot, but it was useless. There were long, wide open spaces and no harsh corners. But that was my mindset. I was still under the impression that there was something I could do, but in reality, I couldn't. Once that started to dawn on me, I realized how screwed I was. It was the emotional equivalent of sinking into a deep black ocean. It was late afternoon when the door opened. Having spent most of the day napping on the couch and anxiously wandering back and forth, I got on my feet like a soldier. One of the guards coaxed me outside. I could tell something was up. People were rushing past us, speaking into their earpieces. We moved in the opposite direction, but I caught a glimpse of a well-dressed group of people used as human shields for someone very important. I was quickly ushered along. I was taken through the hotel kitchen. They'd cleared out the staff. They took me to what looked like an abandoned old walk-in freezer. I was pushed inside and the door was closed. I don't know how those walk-in freezers are supposed to work, but this one locked from the outside. There were no lights, and I could barely make out what was happening through the little windows. I didn't have to wait for long. Just minutes later, I could hear other people entering the room. Some curious, some angry, some crying. One by one, the guests from the previous night were ushered into the freezer. Even the old woman. Well, not all the guests. Only those ripe enough. There were 9 of us in total. Some were mildly annoyed, others were confused. Finally, they dropped a guy who had been beaten straight onto the floor. He was clearly not okay, trying his best to breathe through his mouth. That set most of us off. Some banged on the door, others screamed at the top of their lungs. No one had a phone or a weapon. The panic rose and it spread like wildfire. Soon I was right there with them, screaming for someone to let us out. I screamed, my voice hoarse, but no one came. We must have been in there for at least 40 to 45 minutes. Our protest died, and in the following silence, we heard someone enter the room. A single set of footsteps. They approached, and we all quieted down. I could see the vague outline of a man outside, but our breaths had fogged up the windows on the door. He had a black suit with a blue tie. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, watching us. I backed away from the door, and others did the same. No matter how bad the freezer was, there was something telling me that this guy was somehow worse. He was too calm, like this was all normal. He'd done it before. As the door opened, we all scrambled to get back. He stepped into the entrance, obscured by the bad lighting. But for all I could see, he was a man. A little shorter than me, a bit round around the stomach, bald, maybe glasses. There was something reflecting off his face. And yet, there was something about him that screamed danger. The man who'd been beaten was ready to roll the dice. He took off running, trying to push past and get out. There was a kitchen exit not too far away. So if he could just make it past this guy, then maybe he'd be in the clear. But no, he didn't get far. The strange man didn't tackle him or attack or scream. In fact, he didn't seem to react at all. But the runner, well, he stopped a few steps short of leaving the freezer. He clutched his throat, gasping for air. The strange man spoke in a raspy, matter-of-factly voice, as if counting the inventory on a supermarket shelf.
Male, 38 years old, 6-year spread reaching a total of 18%, implant through esophagus surgery.
And then there was this ungodly noise. The runner collapsed to his knees. He was trying to scream, but all that came out was a sort of guttural wheeze. It escaped him in waves, involuntarily, until we could see something poking out of his mouth, like the silhouette of a wet branch being pulled out. Finally, there was a snap, as it fully dislodged, and the freezer began to reek of blood. He stopped moving. The panic consumed us. I may read calm here in the aftermath, but in that moment, I was an animal. I was scratching on the fucking walls, trying to get back. I didn't care if I was pushing people to the floor or stepping on someone's head. I was desperate. The strange man spoke again, but this time, his raspy voice seemed better, improved.
Female, 29 years old, 4-year spread reaching a total of 14%, implant through spinal surgery.
One by one, he counted us off. Male, female, male, female. 4 years, 5 years, 9, 8. Percentages going up and down. Lung cancer, cornea transplant, dialysis, screams and blood. One by one, being pulled out of the crowd and then pulled apart. I'll never forget the sounds. Small bones sound like carrots when they snap. Bigger ones, and different. The dripping noise as human spillage mixed on the floor. Drops of blood really do sound heavier than water. And with every victim, I could see something shift in our captor. Straight back, deeper breaths, like he was absorbing it all into himself. Taking something back. Harvesting. The 6th person on the chopping block was me. He read it all out loud.
Male,
He began.
31 years old, 24-year spread reaching a total of 11%, implant through ulcer treatment.
My stomach rumbled, moved, twitched, as if coming alive. It wanted to escape me, to break free. It strained against me. I collapsed to the floor, my hands slipping on the blood, seeping into my skin, itching under my fingernails. Then, I felt something move in my pocket. I almost dropped it. I still had my phone battery. I took it out and held it up to my mouth. I could bite down on it, drenching myself in acid or God knows what. My stomach ceased moving, if only for a short reprieve. I looked up at my captor. See this? I said. It'll fuck us both up. But you need it, right? You need me whole? There was no response. I could just see him tilting his head down at me. Yeah, if I destroy myself, you get nothing, right? That's it, isn't it, huh? I placed it between my teeth, ready to bite down like a rabid dog on a juicy bone. He didn't move as I got up. We circled one another. He wasn't about to let me go. He wasn't looking me in the eyes. He was staring intently at my stomach. He wanted to pull it out of me, to turn it into something else. Or maybe it was part of him all along, something coming home.
No,
He said.
it ends.
He reached out a hand for me, and I bit down without hesitation. To my surprise, there was just a little puff. But that was it. The battery tumbled to the floor, useless. The man instinctively recoiled, but upon seeing that there was no danger, it all came back with a vengeance. The pain was immediate and incredible. Something in me moved, and I immediately spat up a small glob of stomach acid. Then, the battery exploded. It wasn't a big explosion, just a loud bang. Like the starting pistol of a race. I slipped and slid my way out of the freezer, and had to make a split-second decision. I could close and lock the door behind me, effectively sealing him and everyone in there, or I could leave the door open for others to escape. But it wasn't really a choice. Not really. It never is when you get pushed into something like this. I slammed that door shut and let it auto-lock without even thinking about it. Perhaps he'd asked the guards to clear out, I don't know. But there was no one else in that kitchen. I grabbed a knife from one of the counters, burst through the exit door, and disappeared into the night. My stomach stirring like a restless animal, but settling as I got further away. I can only regret what happened to those left behind. It still makes my fucking spine itch. A police patrol found me wandering the streets about an hour or two later. I can't imagine it looked good. I was taking such small, shallow breaths, and I was still clutching a kitchen knife. Not to mention, I was covered in blood. They were convinced that I'd killed someone, but I surrendered willingly and eagerly. I tried to tell a coherent story, but they just didn't understand me. I probably didn't make much sense. A shower and a fresh set of clothes later, I explained my experience at the hotel to the best of my ability. Sadly, it didn't really do much. There were no records of the man I'd described ever visiting that hotel. As for the missing people, those I claimed had been murdered. They had checked out one by one at different hours the day prior, according to hotel records. They might be missing, but there was no indication of foul play. Yeah, I'm calling bullshit on that. So yeah, that was by far the worst time of my life. Looking back at it, it feels unreal, like it happened to someone else. But even now, I can still get little flashes of something that reminds me of that night, and it just pulls me right back. It never really leaves. Whoever that man was, he was important enough to get a whole company to cover for him. I'm sure not all of them knew why they were doing it, but they were complacent. I think we're looking at someone with a lot of resources and a lot of reach. I never got a name, and seeing as how he seemed to change with every victim he consumed, I can't really tell what he looks like anymore. Not even his age or length or weight. There are, surprisingly, some real records about a small tribe of people from the Blue Hill in the Scandinavian mountain range. There isn't much out there about them, just a mention that they worshipped immortal mountain spirits. Others say they worshipped devils. It's a mixed bag. I don't know what to believe. I don't know what I saw, but I am living with the knowledge that a part of me, something inside me, isn't my own. It moves with me. It lives within me. But at the snap of a finger from that thing, and it will rebel. It will fail me. And I'm just at, 11%? What happens when I reach 50? Nuru? I decided to post this today after getting a video ad that I could never have anticipated. It seems that this company is still in business, advertising their new generation of DNA tests. I'm sure some of you out there have seen it. 20 seconds, unskippable. Smiling faces, distant families being tied together by CGI blue ribbon. I think they have some of those damn sunflowers in the background, still colored that basic company blue.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man taking time off to himself is visited by a swamp monster. So, have you been fishing? And have you seen Melonhead?
Late last summer, I was going north for my brother's wedding. It was at the start of my vacation, so I decided to make a few stops on my way up north. I'd make a stop for camping, another for a day of fishing, and so on. My brother, who was stopping in Minneapolis, was pushing hard for us to have a day to go shopping together, and I was just not feeling it. He was all head in the clouds and love and talking about his blissful future, and it just soured my mood. How could my younger brother surpass me in so many different ways? Never mind. I was passing through a small Minnesota town when I decided to make my first stop. Fishing. That'd get me far from the blinding smile of my brother. It'd be just me, a six-pack, and all the time in the world. Deal! There was a lake that ran through the west side of town and curled into the woods. There was a dirt road coming around the back of the lake, opposite of the town. It'd probably take an hour or two just to trek back to town through the undergrowth. It was a pretty big lake. The locals seemed friendly enough at the gas station. You didn't need a license to fish, so I figured, hell, why not? So I drove the long way around, parked my car, got my gear, and dug along the tree line for bait. It didn't take long to fill up a jar. I followed the path down to the lake, bait in hand. It was almost lunchtime, and I'd gotten a few sandwiches and a six-pack from a nearby gas station. I had this really comfy camping chair, an audiobook, and nowhere to be for the next 18 hours. Hell, if I skipped my Minneapolis shopping spree with Smiley McGee, I could stay an extra day out here. Also, this gave me an excellent excuse to just skip going there at all. Needless to say, I was psyched. As I walked up to the lake, I noticed a wooden sign, handmade and painted with a clear text, Melonhead. I stopped just to reread it a couple of times. Melonhead. What the hell was a melonhead? I took a picture of it and kept walking. As I got closer to the lake, I started hearing frogs. Like, a lot of frogs. There was this strong, intense smell of vegetation in the air. But as every good outdoorsman knows, frogs are basically a sign of a healthy ecosystem. Sure, in some environments they can be intrusive, looking at you, Australia. But that wasn't the case up north. I put up my camping chair on the beach. I took off my shoes and prepped 2 fishing rods. I put them into empty bottles that I dug into the sand so I could set them aside. I leaned back in my chair, cracked a cold one, and put a baseball cap over my face. As Will Patton started reading me the Bill Hodges trilogy, I completely zoned out. This was what I'd been working for all year. This was a proper vacation. I must have fallen asleep, probably for an hour or so. When I woke up, I'd completely lost track of my audiobook. My beer was warm by now, and my fishing bobbers had drifted all the way back to the beach. I got up, reeled in the lines, and reached for my bait, only to notice it was tipped over in the sand. Empty. Strange. I left my gear on the beach, got my shovel, and returned to the tree line. It took me longer to find bait this time, and I had to go a bit deeper. The frogs were a bit more quiet now, and there were a few clouds gathering on the horizon. I decided I wouldn't stay the night unless the rain passed me by. I didn't want to get stuck in a muddy tent overnight. I could sleep in the car, I suppose. As I got back to my camping chair, I got a bad feeling. Something seemed out of place. I wasn't sure exactly what, but it looked different. Something had been moved. Will Patton kept talking in my ear, but I was no longer hearing the story. By now it was just noise, like a friend who didn't know when to stop talking. As my phone chimed with a notification from my brother, I turned it off and took off my headphones. It took me a few seconds to realize that all the frogs had gone silent. I just stood there with my bait jar, hearing an eerie wind pass through the birch trees. I decided I'd give it another go. If it started to rain, I'd just sleep in my car. So I got back, threaded my bait, and threw my bobbers out one more time. I set my rods back up, put my headphones back on, and put away my lukewarm beer. As I brought up my phone and started rewinding the audiobook, I noticed a ripple on the lake. Not a big one, but a noticeable one. Probably fish breaching the surface. Maybe this wasn't a lost cause after all. Just a few minutes later, the first bobber dipped under the surface. It immediately came back up, but now I knew that fish were biting. Moments later, the second bobber dipped. I held my breath, waiting to see the bobbers dip for real. There were fish there, it was only a matter of time, but minutes passed and I got a strange feeling. I reeled in one of the bobbers and noticed the bait was completely gone. I reeled in the second one, and it was the same. Bait was gone. Very determined and skilled fish in this lake, definitely. I decided to try something different. I brought up my box of spinners and found a black and blue lure that usually worked on bass. My best rod had a spinning reel, so that'd work just fine. I set it up, stepped up to the edge of the beach, and threw it out. Solid, beautiful arc way into the lake. Half an hour passed, and I just got back into the rhythm. The click of the spinning reel, the smoothness of the line. It was nice. Just nice. Then, a bite. Not a big one, but a bite. Finally, I hooked it and started reeling. Not twitching, just a solid, steady reel. Probably not a big fish, about a pound at most. But now I had something to show. Would probably make a neat Insta post or something for my Tinder profile. Laugh at it if you want. It works. My lure was about halfway back when the line suddenly snapped. It wasn't even from the pressure. It was as if the line was just cut. The fishing line snapped out of the water. I just dropped my rod in the sand and threw up my arms. "What the fuck?" I yelled to myself. "What the fuck was that?" And there, out in the lake, another ripple. I had enough. I packed up my things, trudged back up to my car, and dumped it all in the trunk. Even the lukewarm beer. I left the bait jar in the sand, though. These worms were useless. By the time I sat down in the driver's seat, the first raindrops had started spattering against the hood of my car. Then my phone chimed. Of course, the third time my brother was asking if I would make it to Minneapolis tomorrow, I groaned out loud. I couldn't take that kind of toxic positivity. I just couldn't. I needed space. "Sorry," I texted back. "I just set up camp. I'm here for at least another day." So as to not make myself a liar, I decided I'd stay the night. I'd sleep in the car and just listen to my audiobook. That was a kind of camping, right? I had a tuna sandwich packed away, and my lukewarm beer was almost palpable. Not much of a dinner, but I didn't feel like going back to town. It felt more appropriate to just stay out in the woods. I put my headphones back on, turned off notifications, and let Will Patton creep back into my mind. As the clock crept later and later, my lukewarm beer was running out. About 9 p.m., after a long nap and checking my YouTube subscriptions, I had to take a bathroom break. The woods had gotten really dark, really fast. I didn't have to go far, so I just stepped out into the forest and did my business. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing. I could see the lake from there, and I noticed another ripple. It was bigger this time. I zipped up, walked back out on the dirt path, and took a second look. There was something in the lake. Nothing big, but something round, about the size of a basketball. I got back in my car and updated my Instagram. I was a bit pissy about not getting the fishing picture out of this trip, but hey, at least I got a picture of that weird sign. Maybe someone out there knew what it meant. So I took another look at the picture. I noticed two things. One, that round thing in the water can be seen in the background, down by the lake. Two, there's a small spatter of color at the very top of the sign. It kind of looked like the sign was broken now that I looked closer at it. It gave me an idea. I took one more trip out of the car, following the dirt path. Now I could hear frogs again. They were getting louder. Probably the rain luring them out. Using my phone as a flashlight, I looked around the sign. Just as I suspected, there was a second part to it, just off the path. It had been broken in two. The text was clear. "Don't feed. Don't feed Melonhead." What the... I started thinking about what I'd done all day. My bait jar going empty. Bait being picked from the hooks. My fishing line being cut. Had I been feeding whatever the hell kind of animal Melonhead was? I turned back to my car, only to see someone standing on the path. I didn't raise my phone. I didn't want to make any sudden movements. I just froze, like a deer in headlights. I could barely make out a humanoid shape, but I got this sudden realization that I was out, alone, in the middle of nowhere. And now something was blocking my path. It was tall, like 2 heads taller than me. It had sort of a hunchback, and these long, webbed fingers. It had this irregular breathing, rattling a large sack in its chest. It dropped my bait jar on the path in front of me. More. This awful gurgling noise. Somewhere halfway between a regurgitation and breathing in. I carefully picked up the jar and looked up. Whoever this was had this big melon-sized head. This was what I'd seen sticking out of the lake all day. It even had a tint of green. I need my shovel, I gasped. It's just... More! It stepped towards me with a splat. I fumbled backwards, tripping over my own feet. I crawled into the underbrush and just started digging with my hands. I stood there on my hands and feet, ripping into the ground with my fingers. Thick globs of something sticky dripped down as Melonhead loomed over. Every now and then I felt something wiggle between my fingers as I filled the jar with dirt and worms. I held it up, and Melonhead just poured it over its face. The dirt was filtered out and spat back out as the jar was dropped back down next to me. More! I must have dug for hours. Just as soon as I filled the jar, it emptied it. Hour after hour, I just dug, and dug. Breaking my nails, having my fingertips cut by little rocks and roots. I have no idea how long I was there. Hours. An eternity. Every time I slowed down, there was this sound like a man-sized rattlesnake getting antagonized behind me. I even stopped pleading. I just kept going. The rain intensified, drenched me, but I couldn't tell if my shivers came from fear or cold. At some point, when I held up the jar, it didn't take it. The sun was rising out of the dark clouds, and the frogs had gone quiet again. My knees crackled as I got back up, and my fingers were trembling. I was covered in dirt, and my clothes were soaked. There was no one there. I leaned against the closest tree, tried to find the right words, but instead just collapsed into crying. When I got back to my car, I plugged in my phone. As it charged, I called the one person I wanted there, my brother. I had to get away. I just drove, mindlessly. I have no memory of what I did or how I ended up at a gas station. I don't have the slightest idea how my brother found me there. I just remember being glad he did. It has taken me a long time to come to terms with what happened. For a while, I thought I'd had some kind of mental breakdown, thinking that what I experienced was just something I made up. I didn't talk about it. It sounded ridiculous to say out loud, but I really was there all night. I was on my hands and knees, digging. I wouldn't do that for nothing. I was there, and so was Melonhead. I decided to finally make this post after I found a couple of people posting a picture of that same sign on Instagram the other week. It was still broken in half, and right there in the background was that round thing bobbing in the water.